his music had tremendous integrity. He was an honest musician. His music had everything that his personality had.
Like Tommy has insight into another world, like in Irish music, a past, a time before it became popular, a time before, when, like, a time when it wouldn't have even been popular in the street of Miltown, you know.
When we consider the development of Irish traditional music here in London in the 60s, 70s, you cannot ignore the role of the McCarthy family, Tom McCarthy and his family. It was an absolutely huge influence.
I mean, he had all that background, you know, he always talked about Stack Ryan and all those people, you know. So he had learned all that from them, picked it up, again, just soaked it in like as any young fella around Kilmahill. Shian at the time, he went off to England and made up with other influences, but no matter what, he always, that was what was reflected in his music, the background in West Clare where he came from.
But my mother had a bit of music. This whole invention here was very popular in Clare and still is, you know. She always had an old concertina in the house, you know. She'd played, you know, little bits of polkas for people dancing, you know, very simple kind of music, the Rex and Mallow and all that kind of stuff, you know. And I never took much notice of her, like, but there was kind of music in the air, as they say.
Tom McCarthy was born in Shian near Kilmahill in West Clare in 1929. He was only 2 years of age when his father died, and Tom grew up on the family farm with his mother Catherine, his half-sister Margot and brother Paddy.
Yeah, we had a cow at that time, of course, and milking them and going to the creamery, you know. And you were in the Warriors, then we had a good attitude. You had to have them because it was compulsory. And if we had good arable land, you had to till so many acres, you know. You wouldn't be buying much that time. You wouldn't have the money anyway, like. Money was scarce.
Tom became interested in traditional music at an early age and began to teach himself the tint whistle when he was 9. After a few years, he began taking concertina lessons from his neighbour Mick Stack Ryan, as brother Paddy recalls.
We used to go up across the field there, you know, walk up to him, like, and he had a big house, like himself and the wife, he had no family. But he had the concertina, he'd have been inside in an old arse there near the fire, you know. He'd be sitting down with him for a while and he wouldn't say anything about music for a while, but he'd say, them tunes you were learning last, how about them? Tom would say, I have them, I suppose, a kind of one. Play them, he'd say.
We'd be struggling away with it, he'd be showing it to you and you'd play a bit and all this thing, and then he used to say, carry on now, I have to go out, I'm looking at the cows. He was a farmer, you know, cows, you know, maybe I'm talking about that have sheds, you know, right around the house. And I said, all right, yeah, away you go. Oh, he was a bit abusive, right? Off he'd go, you see, and be playing away, like, and I thought I was doing grand, you see, and next thing, you might be playing some kind of a boom note, as we call it, and next thing he'd open the door, he'd walk in. He said, you're not playing that right. Oh. you see. He was only telling us he was looking in at the cows, you know. He wouldn't be looking in at them at all. But I suppose he thought that we'd be embarrassed with him there listening to us. And he just stands outside the door and, oh yeah, and in he comes. That would be Top of the Pops in Clare in them days.
But he'd come home then, you see, as I say, he had no concertina, he'd be only playing in the tin whistle or something that way, you know. But then when he started working in Kilman at Mannion's, there was a shop in Innes, Baker's, where you could buy the 78 records. And he'd have a record, nearly every weekend he'd have a record coming home, Michael Coleman or Hugh Gillespie or someone of all them great musicians. They were awesome, I suppose. And he'd put it on an old gramophone there, and he was playing a fiddle too at that stage, you know. He'd keep playing, he'd keep at it until he'd have the tune brought out. And my mother'd be in bed, God rest her, and she'd say, "Turn off that bloody gramophone, I can't sleep," you know, but he'd still stay at it, like, you know.
As a young man growing up in rural Ireland, Tom served his musical apprenticeship at the house parties or country dances as they were known. These were evenings of music, song and dance when neighbours met in each other's houses.
Hello, Tom.
Oh, sorry. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. God bless you.
Sean McNamara and Tom Carey often played with Tom at these gatherings.
When anyone's having a party, I mean, they invited the whole neighbourhood. You know, someone in every house was asked. You know, there'd be one of the children or some of the house would go around with a little note, you know, to all the neighbours and invite them to the party.
There wouldn't be one sit over. We'd say one crowd would dance to sit, and there'd be another crowd up on the floor ready
That's
to
right.
go up again.
Yeah.
It was a tough job, you know, playing all the night, like, because they'd rest until 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning.
You were respected if you could play well for a dance. If you could put music under the dancers, that was the great musician. It was no good really being a lovely stylist or a lovely tone or anything else like that. They wanted to dance, and they wanted the music to make them dance, and that was really what people were looking for.
A fella might just walk in from next door, he might just have been feeding cattle or something with a pair of Wellingtons on. You know, the kind of style, the real countryman, the cap on the side of the head, and he'd pick up a woman there and dance better than some of these youngsters today that never be as good as him, never ever.
When the country dances finished, you know, there was a great loss of, as I said, social intercourse, you know, and all the neighbours together, you know, enjoying themselves. I mean, it was a real community thing, and you know, when the music, should we say, transferred to the pubs and that, it was a very different atmosphere and a different mix of people, and there wasn't as much dancing as there was, so they lost a lot in that, you know.
In the early 1950s, many of the homes in rural Ireland received electricity for the first time.
We got electricity, big time, and we got a radio. Jesus Christ, I said a radio. And next thing, I used to hear this thing, I think it was don't matter, some evening there, Friday evening, Saturday evening or something, and I used to, Leo Rosen used to have a kind of a little programme of short now, 10 minutes, and the radio. We'd be all gathered around the radio listening to this, you know, and I thought, who's this man? Oh my God, I thought the old sweet sound of him, you know Leo with the regulators and all that, and like the music he'd be playing wouldn't be heard in Clare in them days anyway.
Working as a lorry driver at the time, Tom often travelled to Dublin, where he decided to seek out the piper Leo Rowson.
When I got the job driving down truck to Dublin, of course I was going up and down along the quays there. Do you know Leo Rowson? No, Jesus, who's he? I never heard of him, of course. I thought everyone in Dublin knew him, you know. So, it's a long story. I was up on Thomas Street another time, and I seen his shop there, a clothes shop. I suppose he's dead, it must be gone. Half up there along Thomas Street, and I seen T. Rowson. Oh God, I said, I have him. Here he is. Clothes shop. Walks in. I'd be collecting these goods in the meantime, you know. I'd be working and I'd have my eye out, but anyway, T. Rowson, he was his brother. Oh, he said, that's not me. He said, that's Leo. He lives out in Donecarney. I said, have you the address? Yeah, number 9 Belton Park Road, yeah. In the lorry again and away out and found him. I heard you playing on the radio. I said, Jesus, that's so lovely. Would you make me say them things? And he said, I will. He said, it'll take me about a year. I said, okay, lovely. And how much? And he said, around about £50. I said, grand.
He bought that set of pipes from Leo Rowson for £60. It was a lot of money that time, but he wouldn't be earning, I suppose he'd be only earning maybe about £5 a week. The money wouldn't be big then, for sure. But there was a few neighbours around here, like, when they heard the money he paid for a set of pipes, £60, geez, them notes was awful waste, you know, that you could buy a nice Balmaran for that kind of money that time, you know. That was the go of that time.
I eventually got him. And I called up to the house from one evening, I was like a child. I had the old lorry outside. Sorry. His wife said, Leo isn't home, she said, he's gone out teaching somewhere. But she said, Leon will play them for you. Out he comes, a young lad. I do everything like that. Oh, Jesus, this is heaven, you know. I brought him out in the old truck anyway, and I got him out of the box again, and there I wasn't saying the truck, and I said, trying to play him.
The fact Tom was such a good piper, but not known for his piping as much, which is surprising. Only occasionally I would meet people who would talk about Tom's piping. But he brought from the piping, he had all that. He was very much a friend of Willie Clancy, and he was of that school of piping, if you like. When I started off playing, I heard more pipes than any other instrument. Again, it was Willie Clancy, and that's the music that went into the back of my head, and that's what's coming from. That's the music that's coming out today still, and Tom had that. He had that piping background, and he was bringing that to his concertina playing. That matched with this perfect sense of timing.
In 1952, Tom and his wife Kathleen from Glenamaddy in County Galway emigrated to London. They were part of a great exodus from rural Ireland seeking out the work which was readily available in post-war Britain. Living in London, Tom met and played with musicians from all over Ireland.
These fellas that have their own selection of tunes, you know, from maybe Sligo, Donegal, and all that kind of thing. Like, and it was, I enjoyed it anyway. I suppose they come out of the same situation as myself, you know. But when they were home, I'm sure that I never played much either. But just the fact that they were meeting up with all these fellas in London that they'd never meet here.
We're sitting in the Constitution, which is an old Victorian pub. It's grand in style, it's a bit run down, halfway between Camden Town and King's Cross. It's really in a bit of a backwater, but this was one of the great Irish music pubs in the 60s and 70s. It was one of many dozens of pubs that where music was played from the 40s onwards.
We just couldn't get enough of it. Even when we travelled on the underground here, we would never put the instruments away. Raymond Rowland and myself would play on the underground stations, and then we'd get on the underground and we would play on the underground, and somebody would be banging the case of the accordion and the case of the banjo, and then we would probably be heading maybe for Woodson Junction or somewhere after that. Tom was very well liked by every person, had a great sense of humour, enjoyed a joke, and just you could never ask for a better musician, really, like pipes and concertina, everything like that, and always came around and met all the musicians and joined in with them, never always walked in with his instruments with him and sat down and played and enjoyed everyone's company, and was always made very welcome as well. Just so, can you say so, Reg?
Oh, absolutely. Very well loved, man. I've got a cameo memory, the way that you, certain little sessions stick in your mind, and there's one that sticks in my mind. It was Paddy Breen on the flute, Bobby Casey on the fiddle, and Tommy McCarthy on the pipes. And it just sort of made your hair stand on end. And they must have played like that every night, but I just happened to catch them at one session. And it was absolutely wonderful music. But he was a piper then, wasn't he? I mean, the concertina came out later. And I think he was very shy of that, because that was not a status instrument. People didn't play the concertina. I think Raymond was the same, wasn't he?
Yeah, Raymond.
But then hear him play the tin whistle. Or pick up the fiddle.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know how often he played the fiddle in public, but I saw him play the fiddle.
Yes, I did as well.
Oh, goodness gracious me.
You see, I played a lot with Bobby Casey, an awful lot. And his style of fiddling, you see, would be, he'd have been playing a lot with Willie Clancy. His style of fiddling would be, just kind of silly thing to say, but should be like piping, Conor Fraser and them kind of tunes, And I think just from him, I picked up that kind of thing, I think so, because I never had any really lesson where a fella'd say, oh no, do this, do that, or the other thing, But over the years, I think that's how it happened.
Well, in the first year, they didn't hear Tommy playing the concertina so much, But as a piper, I thought he was lovely. And he was so nice to play with as well, And we played in, as I said, in this pub called the Constitution. And that place would be packed to the doors, maybe an hour before we played, on a Saturday evening or Sunday.
It was a great old spirit, There was no such thing as anyone being jealous about the next man. If you were playing an old pub, you'd say, oh, piano, old fiddle. I know that goes on too, but here, but it was all kind of a happy kind of an affair.
Camden Town was the original centre. It moved down from Kentish Town, which is only several hundred yards away, down to Camden Town, and every pub in Camden Town had Irish music. The Stores, the Laurel Tree, Mornington Arms, there was another Bedford, then there was the famous Bedford. All of them had great music, 2 or 3 nights a week. Well, this is Arlington Road in Camden Town, and it's a back street in Camden Town. Behind me, about 100 yards down there, is the main shopping centre, the busy part of Camden Town. But this is the site of the Bedford Arms. Was a great music pub. Just down the road, about another 100 yards, was the Elephant's Head. There's another music pub, and just another 100 yards beyond that, on the corner down there, is the Camden Stores. I used to call that the Stores. And Tony Howley, the flute player, used to play in there. It used to be said that the best Irish music was to be heard in London. There was certainly a lot of it. You could go out publicly and hear it in pubs. You could walk down the Walworth Road and hear the accordion players coming out of the pub door. You could walk up Kilburn High Road and hear it. We had many of the people who are now recognised as seminal players, Willie, Clancy, Bobby, Casey, Joe Cooley. But it was recognised in Ireland that many of the great musicians are over here, but people like Kieran McMahon came over and recorded, and if I remember rightly, probably it's a wrong quotation, but I can remember him saying something like, "This is where you get the music."
Tom and Kathleen reared 4 children in London: Jacqueline, Marion, Bernadette and Tom Jr., and all 4 began playing music from an early age.
We didn't really have formal lessons, you know. He would have just guided us. If we just played a tune and he thought it was a wrong note or changing it a bit, he would have just advised you like that. But he never really sat down and gave us formal lessons. And he never sent us for lessons either to anyone, apart from piano.
You know, he never insisted me to stop playing. Or he told me once that I said to him that I'd never play that rubbish. He said that to me one time when I was very young, I think, you know.
I started playing the recorder at school, and we were playing English folk songs, Oh Susanna and The Cuckoo High in the Tree, and all those kind of simple tunes. But we used to go Irish dancing, and with my father was playing the fiddle for us at the dancing class, and I used to go back to school, and some of the tunes were coming out that we were dancing to. One of them was The Rakes of Mala, da, 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 da. And I was so proud of myself that I picked this tune up without notes, and I said to the teacher, I cornered her one day, this nun, and I said, listen to this tune, and I played it, and I was very shy, and I said, would you listen to this? And she was so disgusted. She said, that's an Irish tune. So I put my recorder down, and I never played it again. I can't remember if this particular nun was Irish, but if she was, she probably just wanted to leave it all behind as she was embarrassed. You know, you're living in England now, and you just play English tunes.
I remember I was downstairs in one of the rooms, and I just picked up the fiddle, and I was, you know, going from string to string. I wasn't playing any tunes. I couldn't play at the time. But I think he must have just come in from work. He just came in the front door, and he stood at the edge of the door there. And he just looked. He didn't say anything, and he kind of had this glimmer in his eye, looking, thinking, you know, there might be some hope now. He might start, you know. I think, and that's probably when I started. Like, I really got hooked into it, you know. Probably learn a tune off a record, and I might be practicing in the evening, and he might be downstairs and in the living room, and I might come down later on that evening. He might say, oh, I heard you playing the tune upstairs and you have a few wrong notes, or so I'd bring down the fiddle and he'd correct me and he'd set me off on the tune, and that's the kind of way I really learned, you know.
It was only a matter of time before Tom and the family were playing together at the many sessions and musical events not only in London, but throughout Great Britain.
We invited in a family band, the McCarthys, who come from Harringay, and they're going to play for us.
He had a very good friend who was an artist, and he took us to a lot of parties where we met a lot of, say, Indian musicians, and took us to a party where it turned out to be Jimmy Page's wife's 40th birthday party. So we played at that. We met loads of rock stars, and so you never knew where you were going. He'd ring you up and he'd ask you, would you like to play somewhere next Saturday night? And we'd say yes, and you'd get in the car and you just didn't know what house or where you were going to end up, but it was always very exciting. really lovely. How long have you had it?
2 years.
2 years.
I bought it from my sister, and she was here for 7 years before that. I think they must have bought it about 1991.
So this was a very musical house, and all the children read here, all musicians. So we always had loads of parties here and loads of music. We had the Dubliners playing. We brought them back here.
And I remember waking up about 6 in the morning and hearing all this noise going on downstairs. So I went down and the place was full of people. There was the Dubliners had been in town, so Barney McKenna was there. Barney McKenna and Joe Burke, they were both members of the Dubliners, and the Johnsons were there, who was Mick Maloney, Paul Brady, and Adrian and Lucy Johnston, Desi O'Halloran and his brother Vincent. I just remember the place being full of all these men with beards.
It was fantastic coming back on holidays. It was like coming home. My parents used to say we were coming home, and we always felt we were coming home. And we used to stop, first stop was Dublin. We used to stay with the McKenna family, a family of pipers, and the Kellys. We used to meet up with John Kelly and James and the family.
The first stop might be John Kelly's in Capel Street, and the kids sitting out in the car, and they said, "What the Christ is he doing in there now, man? Yeah, who's he talking to in there?" And all that.
Our house in Capel Street was a place where many people came all the time, both from abroad and in Ireland, to visit my father and mother, and that would be the first time that I met them.
But the highlight was the music. That's what we wanted. And we begged and begged, could we come to Clare? And my dad was always mad to take us, so it was, I suppose, grateful, because that's where we picked our music up, really, is in Miltown.
I would take off with the McCarthys then, and we'd go, for instance, down to Listowel to the Fleadh Ceol, if in fact that's where we were going on that particular visit, and we'd head off then from the Fleadh after great days of music and meeting people and laughter and fun. We'd head over then on the ferry across the Shian, and we'd have music on the ferry across, and we might pick up someone along the way, like for instance Mick O'Connor a couple of times, and there'd be other people on the ferry, and we'd have music. And moving into Clare then, of course, we'd hit Miltown Malbay and meet Willie, Clancy and Dorian, Clancy his wife. And all along the way, if Tommy wasn't playing music, he'd be laughing and joking and telling funny stories.
I suppose because of the English-Irish political thing, people couldn't understand why you'd go to Ireland on your holidays. You'd get comments like, duck the bullets and bring your ammunition, and, so I used to tell them I was going to Mallorca, come back white. So, yeah, it was like leading a double life, really.
I think the first time that he perhaps made an impression upon me was in 1969. I think the first Fleadh Nua was held in Dublin, and they had a big night in the National Stadium, if memory serves me right. And I remember Tommy and some of the family were over to play, and that was pretty strange, because playing a fiddle in Dublin back in the 60s was pretty strange for a young fella to be doing. It was a pretty isolated occupation. And then to actually come across people who had London accents playing sort of West Clare music, and people who were actually younger than myself at the time, I remember thinking was very, very strange. And we had no idea that this was also happening in London at the time. So to meet and to hear young musicians of in or around your own age playing this sort of music was pretty phenomenal at the time.
Tom was a founder member of na Píobarí Uillinn, the organisation of Uillinn Pipers set up in 1968. He was also an active member of Comhaltas Ceoltóirí Éireann, playing at many of their regular sessions. His music took him to many parts of the world, and in 1972 he was a member of the first Cultus tour to the United States.
1972 was a big year, I think, for a lot of traditional musicians, because at that stage America was still very, very far away, and Cultus decided to undertake this particular tour. It was a horrendous tour when I think about it in terms of the number of concerts we had to do. I think it was 23 concerts and 25 nights. So you were going flat out all the time. I remember on that tour as well, there was John Joe Gardner, the Shian Band, Joe was on it, Seamus Connolly. There was a whole, I think it was about 30 people on it.
There was, yeah. It was a great,
it
was a great big tour, and there was a lot of musicians and singers and dancers, of course. And we put on big shows and did big halls, auditoriums and big theatres, and Tommy was in his element at that time.
But I think he just enjoyed the atmosphere of being around musicians. I think he felt safe in the company of musicians like that, and he enjoyed it.
And I think he was an adventurer. He liked the adventure of it. He was a man with great. He had great curiosity. He loved to see different things, and he loved to work things out for himself regarding what he had seen and the people he had met, and analyze things. He was curious about how the other half of the world lived.
Where he comes from is a very small place like Shian. There isn't a whole lot going on there, to be honest, you know. And I'd imagine just coming to London, to a big city, being a musician, and the way things turned out for him, you know, everything seemed to go right. He raised 4 children in London. They're all musicians.
But he also enjoyed the richness of it. He lived in Harringay, which was an area which even in those days was very much beginning to be an immigration centre, not just of Irish but of Greeks particularly, Greek Cypriots. He worked with a wide variety of people. Whenever you went to a party in Tommy's house, of which there were many, there was always a good cross-section. It wasn't always Irish. The Irish people were there, the musicians were there, but Tom was very, very much, he took people as he found them.
I wouldn't have missed it, you know. I wouldn't have missed it. You know, you'd never kind of get the same opportunities here, like, you know. In London you had every kind on the road. I used to work with Italians and Greeks and Turks and West Indians, and we used to have the greatest old cracking up on the floors and the building sides and laughing, talking about growing bananas and everything on the road, you know, like that. Which, if I stayed here, I don't know, would you agree? I think it's good for you, isn't it? Travel around a bit and you see people's food and what they eat and what they do and all this thing. I think it's educational, you know.
But he also has the other experience, like, of being like an immigrant in London for many years, you know, and that affects people in a different way. And I think, like, having immigrated myself, like, I met more musicians, more traditional musicians, and got to know more of the real world of traditional music in Chicago than I did in East Clare, because everybody eventually passes through. But London would have even been more so, you know. So in a sense, there's a whole, like, stylistic experience, a whole life experience, a whole lifestyle experience of London and immigration, and a community of very diverse musicians, like, that would come together in that kind of immigrant community. And I think that has a big impact on you. Like, I would see Tommy as somebody that would have obviously gone through that experience, you know, and so I think there's a kind of a tolerance and an understanding and a richness in it, you know.
I think the whole idea of my father's passion for Clare and taking us as small children, that was always so important to us that we all wanted to move back to Ireland. And you never think I never thought I was going to end up in Miltown, Malbay, but that's how it happened, and I'm here 14 years now.
They met up with fellas over there and got married and done all kinds of things and moved back here. And then we were over there now on and we were thinking, the hell are we doing here, like?
In 1991, Tom and Kathleen returned to live in Ireland, settling in Miltown, Malbay.
I think it took them longer to settle back here, my parents, than it did us.
Yeah, because in London, I mean, you get such opportunities like the Jimmy Page story. That happened a lot. I mean, Marion was in the National Theatre, so you can imagine the life that those 2 years gave us. You know, the parties, and Dad was very good friends with Stephen Ray, who was one of the main parts in the play. That didn't happen here because there were so many other musicians, but I suppose Dad was very good friends with Paddy Maloney and the Chieftains, so when they were unable to do work, they'd put him on to Dad. So that's where we got all those great experiences and great social life. But I suppose when he came back here, he led a much quieter life, but he made a big, like when he moved back to Miltown, he started playing in Miltown a lot.
I consider it a godsend when Tommy came here. I was delighted because I knew him well and I had great respect for him. He brightened up the music scene around here, very much so, because I used to meet him regularly and Sunday mornings and Saturday nights. And he gave he was a great shot in the arm to the Miltown area when he came home that time.
And I could still remember him coming into Clancy's in Freels and in here. Usually, as I said, here was usually Sunday morning, but the other two places kind of about 11:15 or 11 o'clock, and then he'd always shove the concertina away from him for about 10 or 15 minutes, and he'd chat about the whatever stories of the day or the stories of the week.
Is to the go and here in mask na gailtam is grawir gan hele go brach an gvair mem the yawl to dam sa ni boy akergant Longa orgal sholta fargem Rovali young do valte farenem Agus kurt frau elga let helvn fargem.
I suppose he was also very generous to people who were new to the session, and welcomed them, and shared his tunes with them. So he had kind of a welcoming, certainly a great generosity, and he had a kind of a quiet authority then, which added a huge amount, I think, to anybody who knew him.
Back in Ireland, Tom continued his involvement in musical events such as the Willie Clancy Summer School, founded in 1973 to commemorate the local piper from Miltown Malbay, who was a friend and contemporary of Tom's.
Tommy McCarthy was involved with the school from the outset, really. The likes of Tommy would be central figures to the school. They were very, very important that Tommy would be at the school. For many reasons. Outside he'd been a wonderful musician and great personality and a very inspiring teacher and a great person to describe his youth and his various musical involvement. So he was very, very central to all school activity.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah, it was great to see his family, Jackie, Marion and Bernadette, being so active in the school. Like they were used to coming to the school with Tommy, but all three are involved in the school at the moment as tutors, and again it's our privilege again to have these people.
Over the years, Tom performed on many albums with both traditional musicians and contemporary artists such as Kate Bush and the group Tight Fit. In 1997, he released a much-awaited and highly acclaimed solo CD, Sporting Nell.
Tommy's on that CD is playing pipes, concertina and whistle, and for me I think Tommy's whistle playing, like our house was a strong whistle playing house, and that was for me the most striking of all, the way he plays it, just the interpretation that he has on the tunes when he's playing the whistle, because I find myself, even when you play a tune on the pipes or a tune on the whistle, that you change it, it's different, you know. Concertina playing the same. We were brought up in Dublin in a house where we just listened to music all the time, and it was music from Clare, music from Kerry, and there's something in the music, if you just listen to it long enough and if you get to understand it properly, then you can understand these qualities that are in the music, that, you know, and that for me, that's the legacy that these people have left behind, that if they had just discarded it, as a lot of people did, you know, then it wouldn't be there for us, the likes of us, you know, which I suppose we have a lot to thank them for.
When I would say a child beginning to play, would say even in the early 70s or on those years, maybe in the late 60s, the word that you always heard when you were in the company of the older music was, will this last at all? Like, is it over? Is it finished? Will it continue? And there was a massive concern, like, among that generation that not alone would it not be appreciated, but that it actually wouldn't exist at all or continue. The big concern was, like, was, you know, parents trying to pass it on to their children. I mean, I'm sure Tom had that concern in a way, like, you know, and I mean, he passed it on to his family.
He treated the grandchildren as he did his own children. And if they came home from school and started playing a tune on the tin whistle, he'd do the same with them. He'd say, why don't you try this or try that note?
Because only Ruth, your oldest daughter, she'd be the oldest grandchild, was taught exactly the same way by my dad, because Mum and Dad used to mind them after school. So she was taught exactly the same way as we were. And she plays exactly the same as him, doesn't she? Yeah.
In the summer of 2000, Tom was diagnosed with cancer. 2 days before visiting Lourdes, where he died suddenly, he paid a visit to his family home, accompanied by his son, Tom Jr. This was the last occasion that Tom played music.
Here we are. Tommy I'm accompanied by Tommy, my son. Here we are in Shian. down here in the west of Clare, the place where I was born and reared, and we're just going to play a couple of tunes that I used to play sort of a long time ago, 40 years ago. One is called Paul Halfpenny, the next one is called Mrs. Galvin's, a fiddler from this area.
It just feels a bit weird. I'm a bit disorientated. I've been back more recently than you. That's why, I haven't. You haven't been back for a long time. We see a massive change. That's why. I don't think it has. We should go to the market. Do you want to go left up here? No, that's true. Do you want to go down to the tube station?
I've been back a good few times, but it's just the fact that we're all together. I mean, we haven't all been together in London for about 15 years.
Oh, it's been fantastic. I mean, it's been great coming back as a family.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Irish Centre. Families don't end, do they? That's one of the great things about the tradition. Families don't end, families go on. And one of the great things about Tommy was how he passes his musicianship onto his children, and indeed today onto his grandchildren.
And thanks to everyone for turning out. It's a real blast from the past, seeing some faces that we haven't seen for about 30 years. But it's kind of sad for us to be back here, because we played here as a family back in the 70s with Mick O'Connor over there every Sunday morning for 7 years upstairs in the Douglas Hyde Lounge. And we also did Irish dancing here, and a lot of our social life would have been surrounded around this place, so it's great coming back and all playing here. Anyway, we're going to fire into a few tunes. We're going to play two reels that we learned from my father. The first one is Molly Brannigan's and the second one is Sporting Nell. And they were the first tunes that he ever learned from a local man in the village that he came from, Kilmihill, called Mick Stack Ryan. So we'll try those two. Thank you.
Walking into the Irish Centre was the place we had been brought to. It was the first kind of social outing with music, and then seeing all these people coming towards us and seeing all their faces, it was extremely emotional, but it brought back so much nostalgia, really. Going back to our own home in Warham Road, and it's just like I'd never lived here, really. That Ireland is really our home, and I'm sure my father would be delighted to hear that, us saying that now, because that was his dream for us all, to eventually move back to Ireland.